My name is Herb Faulkner. I'm one of the corporate and securities attorneys at Wilson Sonsini. We are delighted once again. We've tried to mix things up a little bit in these presentations, so sometimes you get the boring presentations from the lawyers, and sometimes you get the interesting presentations from people who've actually done it. And we're very excited to have Brian today to tell us some of the adventures he's had, but I'll get into that in a minute. Just to remind you, our next tutorial is going to be on March 30th, Friday, March 30th. It's up here again, and the subject is going to be clean tech. Tim Woodward from Nth Power, one of the first and few clean tech only venture firms, is going to be speaking, and hopefully he's trying to bring either one or two of the entrepreneurs that he works with too, so we can get some discussion. And so it should be very interesting. Tim's been investing in clean tech before it was a fad, and what can we learn from what's going on in the past 10 years and going forward. So I think it'll be very interesting. Just to remind you, we've got all these presentations online, and please remind your friends also when they say, why do you get up at this ridiculous hour and drive up to San Francisco? You can say, well, why don't you watch some of these, and then maybe they'll come join us. Also, I'll be holding a round table afterwards today in room 645 around, I think it's over by the elevator. Be about an hour or so, talking about what we're seeing in terms of startup companies and issues with getting funding, angel funding, structures for financings, and then anything that any of you would like to talk about. You can view it also as a free hour with a lawyer, and any questions that you have, although just remember you get what you pay for, so no guarantees. But I really encourage you to come take advantage of this. It's a lot of fun for me, and I hope it provides value for all of you. We at Wilson Sonsini are for many years have been very dedicated to working with entrepreneurs at the very earliest stages, and try to provide you both with legal advice and the experience and the practical advice that we've seen with entrepreneurs starting companies, and also a window into what is going on in the high-tech community and raising funding and operating companies. So please come take advantage of it. Brian, it's good to have you here. Brian is the CEO and co-founder of Powergetics, and he's been guiding the company in strategic course since 2008. Powergetics is developing second-generation demand management applications for commercial electricity users, leveraging state-of-the-art battery and smart grid technologies. Prior to Powergetics, Brian spent 15 years designing, implementing, and running high-volume, high-availability business and technology systems for companies such as Gap, Charles Schwab, Martha Stewart, Kmart, J.Crew, The Body Shop, and LexisNexis. Brian's a graduate from Duke University with a bachelor's in public policy, and received his master's in business administration from the Wharton School. So he has the right pedigree for all of us. So. And I've alluded to some of the adventures I think you've been through. Brian's worked with Doug and some of the other attorneys at Wilson Sonsini, and I think we'll have some interesting stories about both positives and negatives of working, starting a company. So anyway, Brian, thank you very much for joining us.
This is a difficult exercise for someone who's used to going out fundraising and selling the positive things about their company. And so Doug has asked me to come back and recount, in many ways, all the difficult things that have been through here. So you're going to have to go with me. In some ways, the water is flowing the wrong way down the pipe as we talk about this. Just a little bit more of kind of how I ended up thinking about a startup and doing these things. I originally, as I mentioned, got started in internet world in 1995 and came out very excited to be on the cutting edge of anything and everything that was you know, web browsers and HTML and all the things that this might mean, from everything from websites to commercial businesses to catalog retailers to banking and all the other things. Built some of the very largest websites early, became one of the best experts in large data, large availability type systems. Did it again, and woke up one morning realizing that I was no longer building state-of-the-art cutting-edge technology systems. I was actually selling socks because I was working at the Gap and I was helping them sell socks through a predictive analytics system that was sending emails to people. This was the genesis for me going back to Wharton and actually taking this program here through the WEMBA program and really with an emphasis of thinking about how do you take all this education around large data systems and what that means to sell into enterprises and leverage that into a new sector. This is actually the quote that got me started on clean tech. We were looking at a bunch of different opportunities, and this popped up in research in one of the classes in a Merrill Lynch report where they were looking at the total size of the energy market in relation to IT. And being in IT, to think of another market that's actually 2 orders of magnitude larger, and that's not 2 zeros, that's 2 orders bigger, thinking, gosh, there's got to be an opportunity somewhere in something that big. We ran through a bunch of market research, looked at a bunch of different things, and narrowed it down to an area primarily around energy storage. I think, in fact, this in this same report I was looking at it 2 days ago. They called energy storage as being the holy grail of clean tech, and that if you can figure it out, you've really done something special because it interacts with every piece from smart grid to solar to wind and will potentially enable a huge change in how we think about energy today. We ran through a bunch of different things and realized that I was going to need some help and went out looking for partners to think about doing a startup in this space. We had narrowed it down on a macro scale and had run the numbers and everything came up rosy. Went through a couple different classes. And I'm jumping the gun here a little bit, but perhaps the best thing that ever happened to us, and I will sing Wilson's praises here just a little bit because they have stood by us and got us through a number of things, as we'll talk about, but walked into Doug's class one day, talked to him about the business idea, and he says, you know, I think you've got something. Let me talk to the right people. And at the time, you know, as an entrepreneur, you don't, you know, you've got this germination of like, I think there's something here. I don't know what it is. You know, and your first instinct might go to LegalZoom and like, let's just go get something set up. We'll get some things. Don't worry about it. Let's just get going. And I'm not going to take a lot of credit at this point for saying, well, we decided to go with Wilson. We decided to do this. But what I will say is the work that we did in the first month in thinking about founder equity, employment agreements, incorporation, and all these things paid dividends down the road. And we'll talk about how that happened. One of the first things we did is we went out, and I went out looking for a partner, and I sent out kind of a word in the networks of, hey, I want to do something in clean tech. I'm interested in energy storage. Is there someone out there who's doing this? And through a friend of a friend of a friend's girlfriend, met a gentleman who was very strong in the solar space. He had been doing a lot of work in San Francisco, trying to figure out how to do distributed solar and multi-tenant residences. So, and had also come across this idea that if you could use storage in conjunction with solar, you could potentially do something fairly interesting with it. We proceeded to go on a 6-month dating regime. And so this is, we went to a variety of conferences together. We sat down, we had late nights, we had drinks, we introduced our girlfriends to each other. And in the prospect, you know, realized that, wait, this guy is bringing something to the table that I probably don't have. Real-time installation experience, a network of localized clean tech contacts. And he had an EE background, and so could talk about the electrical aspects of what battery storage actually meant. I was able to bring the sales experience, the data experience, and a bunch of other things. It's a match made in heaven in many ways, and so we went about our way. We both sat down with Doug and then the lawyers from Wilson Sonsini. They helped us structure the right structure for the company in terms of incorporation and what the balance of shares would look like. More importantly, we had severance clauses and we had clawback clauses. We'll talk about that in a second. So we went out and started raising money. This is, just to put things in perspective, we incorporated in March of 2009. For those with short memories, this was a particularly fun time to go out and raise money, as there was obviously a large amount of liquidity in the markets at that point. But we went out and got some money from my parents. We had an outside investor come in for the first 100K. And so we started the company with about $200,000 and got running. We hired a couple engineers to come in and help us sort through some of the individual pieces from effectively a diligence piece to see if some of the theories that we had come up with would work. We went out and started selling customers on what we wanted to do. By 2 or 3 months in, we had actually gained some traction because we kind of stumbled into the next thing, right? And we started talking about big data. We started talking about energy storage, SaaS, Holy Grail. These are all, keywords. We raised some more money. We hit some milestones. We came up with a different way of thinking about the problem because we were out talking to customers. We went to Nike, and who had a very forward-thinking aspect around sustainability and facilities, and took it all the way through and actually got a contract drawn up with them to go and be our first pilot customer. This is all the retail stores in the US. There was actually a lot of money coming from the government at this point. So you have ARA, which had somewhere around $25 billion that was earmarked for clean tech projects at the time. This is an insane amount of money from a startup perspective. If you can even just get 1/10 of 1/10 of 1/10, you're in great shape. And we had terrific connections. So we've had people like Nancy Pelosi, TJ Glothier, the former Deputy Secretary of the DOE, working for us in terms of figuring out how to get a grant. And we put together a very sophisticated, at least for a startup of our size, grant application. So this is the part where I get to diverge from the pitch portion of the thing and say, okay, well, this is all, it sounds great, right? We're hitting it, we're starting to get interest. We get some phone calls from Kleiner Perkins. We're about to take off. And we start hitting a couple roadblocks. So we submitted the ARA application and found out about a day later that there was a technicality issue in the way that we had submitted it. And so they decided to throw it out. This is about 3 months worth of hard work. This is local contacts, personal network. We have letters of support from every senator and congressman in California. We were probably as well situated as anyone to go lock down $5 million, and this is non-equity money. We fought it, we worked the telephone lines, we pulled in every connection. Up until the day they announced the grants, we were still a bit in limbo. They didn't announce the grants, I think, until October or November. This was in June. We were at the same time going about and looking at, we got this contract with Nike. Well, this is terrific. We've got to go get these things. We've got this great idea for new technology. Let's go get the technology built. We got the engineers working on it. We thought we'd get it done in October. November rolls around, December rolls around. Okay, that's okay, it's gonna be great. We're gonna figure it out. And what was neat about this whole period is we were doing a ton of due diligence. So we actually were doing it with Matt Jones at Nth Power, was one of the first people that came in, did a terrific job of kind of getting us to focus on the core economics of the opportunity. Thinking about, well, if you add this number to this number to this number, well, that adds up to this, and that's not quite big enough to do this. Maybe you should think about it this way. Sort of discussions. What was interesting about that, and this is one of the things people don't talk about, you learn an incredible amount by trying to raise money, because your venture capital, your angel investors, all of them want to see you as being what you're going to be in the future, and they need the numbers to pencil out economically. And in many ways, as an entrepreneur early, what you see is this huge opportunity, and you've got this vision, and you've got this thing that if you can just get this and this, the battery costs are going to go down, electrical costs are going to go up. If you can just get between those two curves and intersect, you're going to have something. And the VC is going to come in and say, yeah, but if it doesn't have a 3-year payback and you can't sell it for this and this and this, what are you doing here? And you're like, no, you don't understand. It works different. Okay. Solar has this 8-year payback right now, and they're making tons of money, just for the record. We learned a lot, though, in the sales process, and potentially more. And if I tell any of you this, I mean, this is not to deride the due diligence process, because it exists for a reason. But in the process of actually going out and selling to customers, going out and selling to Nike, going out and selling to Gap and Williams-Sonoma, you very quickly learn what are the things that you have to do to even get to market. And what are it makes no difference if you have the world's greatest economic plan. If you can't actually get your first unit in the field, followed by your second unit and your third unit, you'll never get to when you have 10,000 units in year 3 in your business plan. So, and the things you're going to learn along that path are I would say even before you incorporate, before you go anywhere, go sell something. It's the best thing you can do. So we took this and went all the way through diligence. We had Nth Power excited. We had, and I'm going to use some specific names, and you can sue me later. Kleiner Perkins. This is Doug asked me to get a little on the edge, not too far. But this is exciting. We got the whole team. We've now got traction. We've built a prototype system in the lab. We think this is going to work. We take Kleiner Perkins all the way to a partner meeting. There are 15 partners going down to Sand Hill Road. You walk in, John Doerr's there. He shakes your hand. You spend 3 hours, which is a very long time for a partner meeting. At the end of the day on a Monday, they ask some very intelligent questions. We give perhaps the best presentation we've ever given. And we're very excited. Things played out, got into discussions around valuation. 2 or 3 weeks later, that discussion turned into, well, we really need a syndicate partner. Well, we're not sure if this is really quite the time. Maybe in a month or 2, we can't find a syndicate. Turns out VCs will never tell you no. Just remember that. They're always going to be ready for the next play. They're always going to want to be able to make sure they don't miss the opportunity in case it actually does take off. We kept playing. We had another challenge at around January, February as we played through, when we came to the realization that when all the economic modeling and the data, we found this terrific breakthrough in thinking about data differently and thinking about rate plans differently and thinking about all these things. And we need the functional specification of the hardware to do this. And so we went out to go buy the hardware, and it didn't exist. So now we're sitting here at a crossroads. We think Kleiner's going to come through. We're not sure. We're figuring this stuff out. We've got this terrific idea, but the hardware doesn't exist. We've got some hardware guys. We could start building it. We could just get a couple more angels to come on board, and then we get a breakthrough. We give an angel came on board in April. A guy named David Busby, former chairman and CEO of Sun Edison. If anyone knows anything about the role of solar and storage potential, particularly in commercial markets, it's David. And he came in and was our first institutional angel, I guess is the first way to say that, in the sense that he came in and forced us to make sure all our legal paperwork was in place, make sure that all the I's were dotted, T's were crossed. We had the foundation. But we've been operating at this point for a year and working through a lot of the sales and diligence and things. We've brought people on, we let people go, and things along the way. We picked up traction again. So at this point now, the market had caught up with us. Big data and SaaS was very exciting. And we got 5 or 6 VCs. And in June, we got our first term sheet, which is a big deal. And to the external world, this is was an unsolicited, walked in, they had sought us out, they liked the idea so much and the space so much, they had done their research, came to the same conclusions independently that we had about the size of the market, the opportunity, and all the things that were there. They showed up for our first meeting, told them what we were doing. They showed up at the second meeting, at the end of the meeting, in front of 5 other people in our company. The lead senior partner pulls out a term sheet, he puts it across, he says, we want to work with you, here's a term sheet for $9 million. And then makes a joke about how long I'm going to be CEO, which wasn't that long at that point. Now this is an interesting moment, because you've now been struggling for 15 months, almost 2 years to get to this point, and the VC who just said, okay, we're going to go, but it's not going to be yours, and then has the temerity to do that in front of the rest of your team who's now been following you for the last
18 months.
Was the notion they wanted to bring in an outside CEO?
Not at that point. I mean, the notion was that this was a classic Series A, and in many ways, I'll use a term, and it's kind of considered to be a bit of a predatory term sheet, which means it's a lockup. So they know that the big guys we were talking to 3 or 4 other tier 1 VCs in the Valley. They knew that. These guys are kind of an up-and-comer, not quite there, but close, dedicated clean tech firm. And so they put the term sheet out with reasonable terms for where we were, but had a lockup diligence phase, which means if you sign this term sheet, we'll do this money, but we have 45 days, you can't do a deal with anyone else to figure out whether or not we want to do this deal. And mind you, we started in 2009. The idea of having any money at all at this point is very exciting, and to have someone come in, more importantly, who knows this space and is very respected and understands it, and come in and says, we know what you're doing and we think it's great, is also exciting, because at this point, every VC comes in and says, pick. And so you have to have this terrific feeling around what it is you're doing. We sat on it. And my partner and I at the time had a number of very late nights arguing about, should we do it, should we not do it, but we've got these other people, we'll probably get a better deal. As an entrepreneur, you know intuitively that a single offer is not a market. So unless you've got at least 2 offers, you'll never know what you're actually worth at that point. And can we get another offer in? And we tried to told everyone, like, we got a term sheet, come on, let's go. And no one else quite made the turn quickly enough. A month went by, and we're still haggling, trying to string this along. And in the due diligence piece, I got a phone call from another VC. And this was another one that we were very excited to work with. Actually, it wasn't even a phone call, to be precise. It was an email, and it was just a question. It says, I was just doing some research online, and I have a question about your partner. I was like, oh, okay, well, he says, well, here's the link. Okay, so you go on and click the link, and this is now very public, so this isn't like they went and did background searches or anything of the sort, and came up with a comment online that questioned whether or not my partner had actually graduated from the university that he had said he did. So this is a very clear, simple factoid. This caused some raised eyebrows internally, and I went and actually looked it up, and it turns out that what we'd been representing for the last 2 years in terms of educational background for our partner was not actually true. And this is a problem. VCs want to put in 10, 15, $20 million. They want to back founders. You talk to recruiters, it turns out that if you misrepresent something on this level, you tend to have misrepresentations on others and whatnot. And so we sat down and had a very difficult discussion with my partner at the time and said, look, this is not okay, right? I mean, this is, you're on the masthead of what we're doing. And we essentially agreed to not agree and found ourselves in a bit of a limbo. This is the point where planning for success actually makes you successful, because if this had happened in a vacuum, if this had happened in a, we're still on a handshake, or we've done the legal Zoom or done all these different things, there wasn't a framework, would not have been a framework, I should say, to deal with these types of situations. And we were very lucky in this context to have worked with the right people and thought about these things in the right way up front, so that when the event occurred, for better or for worse, we were in a position to have a framework legally in which to have that discussion around what we should do, what was due to who, if we, were there terms for cause, were there not terms for cause. And now, instead of arguing or being held up in a larger picture, you can at least have a discussion around who was due what and what we wanted to do, even if you didn't agree to agree. This took about 6 months. And in many ways, we dealt with it. We got very excited again. We realized that this was an issue. Doug?
So in the meantime, when this little factoid showed up, did all your
So, yeah, so that's a great question. So I'll tell you this. So you are the CEO and founder. We've got 10 people working for us. You have probably $500,000 of your own personal network money in it. You've got another $1 million to $2 million in it in angel money. And this quickly goes from being a, hey, we're around the kitchen table, to you have fiduciary responsibilities. And so the very, very first thing I did was actually call my lawyer, who was fantastic and laid out the individual steps, what you need to do. And when I say the first thing, I'm talking about 15 minutes after actually validating what happened. What do we do? The second call was to our other board members. So David Busby had joined us at that point, and talked to him about the situation. And then the next immediate call was to the VC and said, this is highly embarrassing on a number of levels, both for me personally, for the company. Certainly not something that we intended or whatnot. We're going to clean this up and take care of it. And when we're done, we look forward to coming back and talking to you, because this is not reflective of the business opportunity. It's not reflective of the rest of the team. This is very much a personal situation that we're going to have to deal with, and we'll go from there. Looking back on this, and I've talked to a number of people, you know, it's most companies presented with this situation fold. And you guys have dealt with this in one form or another, but this was a situation where this is someone who had invested a lot of time, effort, and energy into the company and wanted to see it succeed as much as I did. And at the same time, had stepped over the boundaries a little bit in trying to do that. And the decision making at whether or not you try to hold hands and walk through it versus whether you think you can fight it out happens in a very short time frame. This is not something where it takes 3 or 4 or 5 weeks. This happens in hours, and you typically have what you do in the first hour and the third hour and the fifth hour have massive ramifications all the way down the road. What you do in the second day and the third day. And I can tell you this moved from, we found out there was an issue, we contacted our VC, we then reached out to our other VCs the next day and the next morning and told every one of them this was an issue, this is outstanding, you have materials from us that are not representative of what we're doing, and this effectively shut down our entire VC fundraising process. Dead. Consider that. We're now 18 months in, we've raised 2.5 monies, we're sitting on one of the biggest ideas and spaces. We have some of the most senior support, we have an incredible network of advisors at this point. We have customer, we have Cost Plus and Chevron, we have real customers that we've signed up to do this. And in one 15-minute period, the entire thing just gets cut off dead in its tracks. And we got a burn rate of $150,000 a month. We've got about 5 months worth of money in the bank. You can take it from there. The things I've learned, and I will tell you, one of the things you read about, the great CEOs and founders, I've seen research and studies and things, but usually the only commonality between any one of them, sometimes they're technical, sometimes they're salesmen, sometimes they're other things. But typically the only thing that lines up is that they typically just don't quit. And I can tell you the number of times along this way where you can look in the window and look in the mirror and you just, really? Come on, really? The good news is looking back, and I've had a chance now to go get coffee and drinks with the various VCs, that during background checks, this had come up, had not always been told to us. And so the prospect of going to KP wasn't necessarily about the business, it wasn't about the opportunity, it wasn't even about the rest of the team, it was that we were failing management background checks all along. And it wasn't until this one VC happened to find something that was public and actually send it to me with a question that it came back to our attention. So this is something we are now spending 9 months going after.
Without divulging identities unless you'd like to, what were the range of opinions you had in terms of this background?
And I'm going to have to be very careful here because at this point, as I told Doug, I'm skirting our releases a little bit here. I mean, you know, at the end of the day, I will say this. Before we started the company, because we were so far disconnected, we actually ran criminal checks, background checks, credit checks, and everything as part of the package to get into bed with each other. The one thing we never ran was an education check. It's $10. Yes, I kick myself in the rear every once in a while. And the VCs will go through, and they will go through your LinkedIn profile. They will call people you haven't talked to in 10 years. If they're going to put $10 million into you, they do an incredible level of diligence. You know, and like I said, after the fact, I had a couple of them actually pull me aside. Well, I pulled them aside and said, "Really?" I'm like, "Come on, you guys. This is." And that's just so you know, the VCs are in this to make money. For the VCs out there, no offense, it's a good cause. I'm a capitalist too. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of really, really bright, smart people out there. And if you're going to be an entrepreneur, you have to be confident. You kind of have to believe that you can bend the rules to what you're doing. You kind of have to believe that this is right, and even though everything says it's not right, and it's a very small step to kind of step over that line. And it's, in talking to our advisors, this is not uncommon. You tend to get brilliant people who are highly confident, borderline things, and they just think that the world is going to merge to them, that they don't have to necessarily play by the rules. And this is, you know, it's something you deal with. This is why you have Wilson Sonsini. This is why you put in the contracts and the other pieces in place up front, that you have these things in place. Because, you know, this wasn't just me. This is David. I mean, we had 3 or 4 big angels who'd come in and done the deals. I'm glad to say that we resolved it. So this is I mean, this is you know, part of the fairy tale pain in the ass discussion here is these are all the lumps that you never see. Along the way, there are a lot of things that offset that. You know, this is, you know, the point where you know, you have a CEO of a large energy finance company on the East Coast who calls you up a month after you resolve this. He says, "I've heard of you. This so-and-so told me about it. I got a copy of your deck. I'd like to invest $250,000. Okay, but I've never talked to you. It's like, "No, it's all right. I've heard the story. It's all good. Where can I send the wire?" And an hour later, we got a wire for $250,000. This is literally about 90 days after we'd gotten the release signed and everyone agreed to go on their ways and see if we can make this work. We got interest from a lot of the VCs, and then went back through the process, and again, it's a terrific business. It's a fantastic business. We're taking big data and turning it into small batteries. We're fundamentally changing the cost basis for how to go think about energy distribution for distributed solar for commercial businesses in a way that no one's done it before. We've cut the cost structure by 3/4. We've got a sub 2-year payback. I got a call a year and a half ago from Jim Detmers, who was the COO of CalISO. He had actually started CalISO 13 years previously at PG&E, ran it for 13 years. Of the 30 companies that he had gotten presentations from previously, he picked ours, and he called me and said, "I want to come work for you guys. I'm done with the ISO. I'm tired of 24/7. My wife was sick, and it was time to do something new, and you guys are doing the right thing." And so we picked up Jim Detmers, who's now our part-time COO and CSO. And in September of last year, we closed a $10 million round for venture capital from a company called the Angelino Group, which we are thrilled with. And I will tell you why. It's because the Angelino Group was the firm that called me with the issue about my partner 1 year earlier. So we have come full circle, came back to them. They watched us deal with this issue, believed in the business, believed in the opportunity, and made the investment. And it's been a long road, but we are back to where we wanted to be. We have now, at this point, built the hardware. And for those who are familiar with Enphase and clean tech and understand these things, we have just built a brand new class of inverter technology and we are mapping that with state-of-the-art predictive algorithms using big data and micro resolution for commercial businesses and smart meters. And between the two of them, we are revolutionizing and going to completely revolutionize the distributed solar market and how we produce electricity for everyone. And we're excited to be here, and I want to thank Doug for giving me the opportunity to come speak, and I'll open it up to questions at this point. But it's a long tail, and I'm skipping a few things, I'm sure, along the way, because you try not, I think the human condition is to put the negative things back in the closet, and you don't worry about it, you think about the good things along the way. And it's important, particularly as an entrepreneur, because I don't want anyone to ever think that it's easy. And I suspect that there are a lot of other entrepreneurs out there who don't get funding in the first 3 months. It takes a year or two sometimes to get to where you're going, and this is just part of the cycle. Your business gets better because of it, and at the end of the day, it's about the business, it's about the idea, it's about changing the world, and that's where we're at.
So I'd like to ask the first question, and as you get questions from the audience, can you just quickly repeat them because it's being webcasted?
Sure.
So I have two questions without regard, or two questions on one area. Without regard to speed bumps and educational factoids, when you're selecting a co-founder, can you comment on kind of any takeaways, any philosophies you have now about how you pick a co-founder, and also how did you guys divide up the equity, the founder stock in the company?
Sure.
Because apparently you spent a lot of time talking about these things.
We did. Should I repeat that question just for the camera? So the question is you've now been through a pretty hefty founder issue. What would I think differently about it now, or what have I learned? What would I share in that context? And then how do we actually get to the stock distribution between the two of us when we started? Going into it, and I alluded to this earlier, the two things I took to the table is I'm coming, this was 3 years ago, and I could talk to you about kilowatt hours and C rates and battery chemistries and safety. I'm immersed at this point. But 3 years ago, finding somebody who could complement me in clean tech, who was actually doing solar, who understood installations, who could talk the lingo, could understand the actual physics behind electronics and what that meant from a hardware perspective was incredibly valuable. As I looked at my network and reached out, I knew security people, and I knew business people, and I knew commerce people, I knew Wharton people. I didn't know that many people doing solar. It just wasn't within the spectrum of what I'd been doing. And so there was a clear rationale at that point from a complementary skill set perspective. The other piece was this person was sufficiently removed from my network that there was kind of this idea of well, he's going to bring a whole nother network to play that we would be able to leverage and do that. And that's the one that I would question, is that I use that in many ways as a reason to do the project. In retrospect now, you can do the project. It will take a little longer. You can fight your way through it. You can find the people that you need to do the project in the way you need to do it. But there's no substitute for having somebody who's 1 or 2 steps away from you as your partner. Because there are issues, there are things, there are background checks. You can take 6 months. You can take 6 months and date somebody and still not find, if they're smart and don't want to share it, all the issues that are under the table. There's no substitute for having somebody who you have 10 other people who've known them for 5 or 10 years that you can go do reference checks and they're going to tell you the truth. And if you're thinking about bringing on a partner, if you're considering doing that, that's the piece I would look for. The other piece, the complementary, the technical, the thinking about it piece, insanely valuable. So line that up. That's great. It jump-started us. Frankly, it helped us get started in the space. But don't think that if they're further removed, I would, and that's a personal lesson situation that is somewhat specific, but that's something I would do differently. On the equity piece, we had split it roughly 50-50. It wasn't exact. We had gone through pretty detailed process of kind of who's bringing what to the table and what and where and pieces and materials and who'd worked on it and what types of things, and then gone this huge exercise, and it ended up being roughly 50-50. Interestingly enough, that factored in later. I would tell everybody at the beginning, it's just an idea. And it's funny because when you're in the moment, you're like, God, but I've spent 6 months and I've put everything, we're thinking about it, and this guy's like, well, I'm bringing these 2 customers and I'm bringing this dollars and I've got a space and a lab and I've got a hardware engineer. It doesn't matter. And they tell you this, and Doug will tell you this in his class. You'll read this in the books. It doesn't matter. Do it 50-50, and it will. As you move through the process, it solves control issues. It solves discussion issues. It solves all these other things, and this, it kind of added a layer of complexity to us dealing with the situation because we had it just a little bit of a micro split, and then we had to structure it differently. But luckily, some of the other foundational legal pieces that were designed to deal with these situations stepped in at that point. But we like I said, we ran through a fairly detailed process of what was worth what to whom and how to do it, and largely so everyone could feel good when we started. But there's no substitute for just doing 50-50, and I'll say that to anyone 10 times over who wants to listen. I have no idea. The question is if I had run the background check on education check, what would be different today? And would I have still done business with this person? Possibly. We've got 3 other guys in our team today out of 30 that never finished college or didn't even go, and they're some of the smartest guys on the team. And particularly in the technical world, really, really, really bright technical guys can get work, and particularly when they're, older and not, graduating today. I mean, they're out there, and they're sometimes are the smartest guys you can find. In this case, because I had to for legal purposes, I went back to the very first document I ever received that had education on it and mapped the 2 of them. So if I had seen that earlier, there would have been a huge red flag even to me. And there had been a couple yellow flags, but that would have been a red flag. It would have changed how I would have thought about control, about equity, and some of the other things. I don't know at this point, looking back, because the problem is at this point you know everything, so it's hard to separate some of those things out theoretically. But I wouldn't say if someone doesn't have a degree, do you not get in? No, absolutely. I mean, like I said, there are smart people there. Someone who comes out day one and makes that level of misrepresentation, that's hard to know.
Talk a little bit about the legal foundational pieces you think that help you and then other entrepreneurs that you've seen have been successful. Those early stages are really critical. So what are some things that you've gathered from other people, and then in your experience, what are the foundational pieces that help you?
Sure. So the question is, what are some of the foundational legal pieces specifically that helped us get through the process, and what would I recommend to others? I would classify this in 3 areas very quickly. One is make sure the initial incorporation, bylaws, employment agreements, invention assignment agreements for IP assignment, make sure all of those things are executed and that they are state of the art. I mean, that stuff changes literally on a 6-month to yearly basis, and so you want whatever the current state-of-the-art stuff is, and make sure you get that and you get that stuff executed, and execute it when you actually sign the incorporation papers. Don't, well, we're going to get to it. Just do it. Do it up front, and you won't worry about it looking back. We used as a fundraising method convertible notes. I'm going to get into religion a little bit here, but this is a relatively new thing that came out of kind of 2007, 2008. A lot of angels were getting burned in the process of making investments. The VCs would come in and either squeeze common to the point and do other things, and they really wanted another level of protection in how they were making their investments. And so a lot of angel investments, and I think we're starting to move a little away from this, from what I can see. These guys can probably know more than I would. But in 2008, 2009, it was very in vogue for angel investors to make investments in the form of a loan to the company that then had a conversion provision that when you went and did a Series A or a preferred round, that they would convert into that preferred round. Now, they may still get squeezed and all the other things, but at least they're guaranteeing at that point that they're going to have the same preferred terms that whatever the biggest fish in the sea was going to come forward in the VC, that they would be on par at that point. There's a fundamental issue with convertible notes, and we ran into this over and over again. Your investors are not on the same side of the table as you are. They are effectively, every step along the way, they're going to argue the valuation against you. They are going to argue the terms, who you do the deal with, and all these other pieces. And so there is from day one, you're setting up this kind of classic incentive clash between the entrepreneur and every investor that comes in on that level. So that's just, you have to understand that. And that was something that played out for us time and time again. They want to see you succeed. They're investing in you. Don't make, it's not like you're at class warfare all the time, but there are micro decisions that are made all the way throughout that factor into it because of that convertible note structure from an investment perspective. Now, I say that, and interestingly enough, it's because we had a convertible note structure that probably got us out of the jam that we were in, because all of the investment dollars, if we had gone bankrupt, everything would have flipped over to our investors. And because most of those investors had come in through me in some sort of network, we had kind of at least our button was on the nuclear button, that if we pushed the button, the outcome we were going to be able to control in the event of a bankruptcy, and we had to wipe out common and all the other things associated with that, because we had the convertible note. So I have to sit here tongue in cheek and say, in the worst down case scenario, that actually helped us tremendously. But we paid for it along the way in terms of valuation, in terms of some of the clauses and other things that we got there. Now, having said that, we ended up with a terrific term sheet with terrific terms. I mean, we have probably, and I've seen all the numbers that come out of the law firms at this point. We're in the top 10 or 15% in terms of terms. It's not 1x liquidation, non-participating preferred, et cetera. So, that worked out. We probably took a hit on the valuation though because of it. Those are the two biggest things I would say. Looking at that. There's a small nit in there about arbitration and accelerated arbitration and whatnot. The lawyers love arbitration that lasts a long time and whatnot. I've actually gone in and retrofitted a lot of our stuff and added the term accelerated arbitration into all of it to kind of enforce some of these issues. Most startups can't deal with the burn. Arbitration takes 6 to 12 months in a classic setup, whether you're doing jams or AAA, and you've got to have $1 million in the bank to get your way through it in any form, or you've got to have a pretty big line of credit with your law firm. And even with a lot of help that we had, I'm not sure we would have made it that far. Accelerated arbitration at least gets you, out in 3 to 6 months and a potential to solve that issue within the legal framework. We actually had a very specific idea. It just wasn't baked. The initial idea going in was to do load shifting for residential solar. And that we believe that there were battery technologies that were just about to come due that were going to drop the price point far enough that would make sense. And jumping in with both feet and actually getting in bed with some of the battery technologies and understanding where they are. For anyone who's looking at energy storage, I can tell you right now, battery companies, there are a lot of battery companies. A lot of them are VC funded. There's only 2 or 3 of them that actually ship anything. And we thought we had one of them, and Michael will appreciate this because he knew where we were a year or 2 ago. We actually have been using batteries in-house. We actually just went and placed our first major order for them. And they were like, yeah, we can get them, no problem. They still haven't shown up. It's been 2 months. So one of the biggest issues we dealt with early was we had made a bunch of assumptions around what our price structure was going to be on the batteries that turned out to not be true. And the battery market was not anywhere close to what they were saying it was, and that it was going to take a lot longer to mature. You know, people say you know, the journey is the goal, the business plan is meant to get you started. Well, in this case, we had a plan that said, we think batteries are going to be this, and here's the 5 reports and the 3 news things and the 1 person we talked to. And 2 or 3 months in, it became very apparent very quickly that batteries were not actually going to be that level, and so we had to get very creative very quickly in thinking about, well, if batteries are actually, how do I either change the batteries or increase the revenue so we can get this thing to work? And that's where the creative juices really start flowing. You're now in both feet, you've quit your job, you don't have any choice. You know, your uncle's thrown in $5K and calls you every day and wants to know, how's it going?
At that stage, you were funded already?
Yes.
Angel? How did the angels think it?
You know, what's interesting at this point is, I mean, the angels, you know, I think angels at this point, you know, are investing in many ways in the macro opportunity and in the people as much as anything, right? I mean, you're often in a lot of these things, you're so early stage that, I mean, unless you've got something that's just, you know, social media or something like this, where, you know, the traction is obvious and you're just hanging on for dear life. Those are very specific. Most of these things are more, you know, we've gotten into it, we've got a great idea, we know the macro model works, and if you follow these 2 trend lines, it's going to be big. And we've got a little different twist. You know, at that point, you can start getting angels. We did something that I think I would do differently. We had a rolling raise. So we went out and said, we're going to raise $1.5 million to get to the first stage. And we raised 250, and then we raised another 200, another 100, and a couple 50s, and we brought the money in. And I think it's a lot more effective to say, we're going to raise $1.5 million. I want commitments from everybody, but we're not going to take the money until all $1.5 million is in the bank. Because it puts you in this really kind of weird situation where you've got money, you want to do things, and you're moving along, but you're perpetually going to run out of money at any point in time. And so you're always working on kind of these micro milestones, trying to meet due diligence or other things, as opposed to, here's a $1.5 million, it's open, you go raise the money for a month or 2, whatever it takes to go close it out, put the money in, and go execute for 6 months or a year, or however long that gets you, without getting in the distraction of having this continuous process of having to go out and fundraise, because it's a time suck. And don't get me wrong, as a CEO, as a founder, all you're ever going to do is raise money. Either you're going to do it by selling people to get revenue, or you're going to go do it, you know, in terms of raising money from angels or partners, or frankly even getting grants, you know, which is another form of raising money. That's all you do. But you can be a lot more intelligent about it by raising it in larger chunks, getting commitments, and doing other things along the way. Doug?
So can you comment a little bit more? If you skip past the angel phase, and now you're talking about raising money from institutional venture capital. Could you, sounds like you've had a lot of fun doing that. Could you offer, I mean, do you have any wisdom or insights on if you were going to do it again, would you do it differently? What
Sure.
are the takeaways that you learned from your experience?
Our very first VC meeting was with Rockport Capital. Do not go to a tier A VC for your first VC meeting. I'm just, find friends, dry run it, pick a couple people. Yeah, don't. We actually did an okay job. I mean, in retrospect, looking back at it, I now kind of look back at it, and it's kind of the equivalent of, like, you know, the pitch deck and the story was kind of like riding a tricycle compared to the Ferrari we have right now. I mean, that's literally the difference. You do it enough times, and it really gets baked in. They don't teach this in school, unfortunately. I guess is why we're here, right? Set up a Google Doc room. Go put all the key materials that a VC is going to ask for. This is going to be your legal paperwork, your ascension assignments, your employment agreements. It's going to be your business model. It's going to be some base level research background. It's going to include any business agreements you may or may not have. You need to redact it and do the things, put the key terms there. Put it all up in a single online Google room or equivalent data room, and do it once. don't revise it. The VCs are going to ask for lots of different things. Every single one has a different touch point. They want to know about battery pricing. They want to know about how demand charges work. They want to know about commercial businesses' willingness to accept energy efficiency. I mean, it goes on and on and on and on. And it's very easy to get into a response. Yes, okay, we'll do that, we'll do that, we'll do that, because you want to raise the money. Take control of the situation and put some process. Before you talk to a single VC, put together the best package that you think is going to be everything they need. Bounce it off a bunch of people, take informal meetings, have them come in, even call a couple of VC buddies or whatnot, they're a junior, and have them come in and poke at it and run it through. And then build a deck around that, make sure all the pieces flow so that anything that's in your deck, you've got backup for what that looks like and what the numbers are. And then you go out and you start pitching, and you should do probably at least 10 pitches to VCs that you don't care about before you go do a pitch. We did it wrong. I tell you all this, and it's like, we didn't do that. We went to Rockport, blah, blah, we went, Kleiner and everything. But we didn't really hit stride until probably 2 months after that first pitch in Rockport. And don't get me wrong, we had a partner meeting with Kleiner, right? So you can get there. But the number of hours and the cycles and the lost sleep trying to respond to every individual request adds up. And if you can get in front of that and make it cleaner, it makes a more positive impression on the VC as well, because they like to see the level of structure and organization that goes into that. We had an advantage because we actually technically went through that process 3 times before we raised the fund. So by the time we got to the third one, here's your due diligence package, here's all the different pieces. It was a lot cleaner and a lot of things. You would have always preferred to try to get it on the first round, not third. This is the do as I say, don't do as I do lesson. Any other questions? Sure.
Can you talk a little bit more about the angel financing process?
Sure. Just a question about angel financing, a little bit more about that. The two are very similar, VC and angels. I think angels is kind of a microcycle. So we're going through the process right now of prepping for our Series B, and it's very much a game of, well, this person's invested, so we should go talk to this person and this person. And the angel process is, to go to someone and say, well, we have Bill Millichap and David Busby and Scott Brown. I mean, that's a very different discussion than saying, well, I have my Uncle Phil and the guy down the street. And so in many ways, part of the challenge is and the VCs will always tell you, like, oh, we love it if you have family money in, and we love it these things because they know that you're not going anywhere because your mother's inheritance is on the line. But as much as you can go get, and this is where the commitment piece comes in when I say go fill out $1.5 million worth of commitments, because it's a lot easier to get a commitment and then say, well, this guy's committed and this guy's committed, that if we can go get commitments for this level, everybody's going to invest. That's a very different game than, well, Jim down the street invested, and then I got this guy to invest, and then I got this guy to invest. And so, we had our break or two when we had Bill Millichap came in from Marcus & Millichap, one of the largest commercial real estate firms in the U.S. Len Lodish came in a little bit after that, but I think also because we had Bill Millichap. And so we had gotten a little bit of traction, and very quickly the rate and scale and size of the investments and the type of people that were making investments went up. A lot of these angels too, in one of these rolling rounds, they'll put in 50, and then if you bring in somebody else, they'll throw in another 100 or another 100, and so they stage their investments to do risk mitigation along the way as well. Again, you bypass a lot of these issues if you can go set up a round with a clear target, get the commitments, and close it all at once. It's a little bit easier, and you don't run, it's a lot less discussion and pieces along the way. The VC piece is a little different, although very similar, which is they don't want to do this solo if they can help it. They'd very much like to have somebody else in. And as an entrepreneur, you kind of do too, frankly. The more people at the table, the more pockets, the more likelihood that you're going to have network and money and all the other things as you go. It just happens on a lot longer time scale because the amounts of money that you're talking about are different. You're raising 2 years, 1.5 years at a time, as opposed to 2 months, where you're already working on the next 100K. Does that help?
Yes.
I'm curious, was there ever any discussion or possibility of perhaps your partner relinquishing his officer board seat, reducing his shares and keeping vesting and being just more of a technical person as opposed to, and revising,
Sure.
on resumes?
This is in the things that happen in the hours and days after these type of events occur. The question is was there any discussion with the founder about taking a step back and either relinquishing the board seat, taking a more just a technical term, pulling him out of the limelight, dealing with a situation potentially different than how we ended up? The first conversation that we had was, we have a problem. Let's be very clear that if we don't come to a resolution, we're going to have to deal with it. But we'd like to resolve this in a way that works for everybody. The problem is that what he came back with in terms of what his idea of resolving it looked like was so far outside of what was practical, or you could argue reasonable or not, but outside of what would have worked, that would have put us in a position to get the next round of funding or anything. We could have done half of it and it still would never have solved the issue. And so very quickly, within 3 or 4 days, got to a point where it was just clear there was a disconnect, for better or for worse, around, big grandiose idea that's going to make billions of dollars. Well, then I want I want half that today. But we only have 3 months worth of money in the bank. You can't reconcile those things at that point. So, in hindsight, do you walk into that conversation with a concrete recommendation around what that should be and what that looks like? That might have helped reshape that discussion. It's not clear to me it would have changed the outcome at that point.
Do you think the VCs would have accepted if you come to an agreement? They're acceptable, you've resolved it?
That's hard to know, I'll be honest with you. And to the degree, that was clear at the VCs at that point, had spoken very loudly, at least to me and to the current investors, that they wanted the situation resolved before they would look at it. And the problem is, and I'll say this to anyone who happens to be on the other side of the fence from where I sit, and if you find yourself in a situation where you're having a founder dispute and you're trying to solve it, and you're the one that was kind of, for whatever reason, maneuvered out politically for good or for ill, or whether you were wrong or right, doesn't matter. The issue is the second that you're outside and you're trying to figure out how to either get back inside, or you're trying to figure out how to have either an amicable or positive resolution for everybody, how you deal with that exact moment and the next immediate responses says a lot about how you're going to deal with anything moving forward. And so if you come to the table with an unrealistic ask as your first step, and then you follow that up with another unrealistic ask, and at this point things get very emotional, and you very much have to, that very quickly turns into a situation, if you're not careful, into irreparable damage being done with your current investors. And remember, your current investors are going to be asked by every VC that comes in about what do they think about the founding team. And if you don't deal with that first, second, and third interaction well, your ability to bring it back becomes almost impossible. It's like it diverges so rapidly, and that's, the people say it spins out of control. It kind of does in some ways, right? You do one thing, you do another, and they seem like rational reactions to one thing or another. And what's interesting about this is I think we actually did a fairly good job of maintaining control of the information flow in the process, which is, I think everyone kind of understood what the legal framework, everyone is on roughly the same page. But if you make one mistake in a spreadsheet that throws one thing off, that will add a whole nother dimension. So you're now talking about 1/10 and they're talking about 1/100th, and you're like 1/10, no way. That's ridiculous, but they're actually talking about 1/100th, and that's because there's a math there. And that happened once in the process, but that doesn't, you have to play, it's just like a startup. Things go wrong. So you have to be able to play through it, and you have to be able to take a step back from every single interaction and just say, okay, I'm going to take the emotional piece out of this. Let's be very rational. What do they need? What do they want? What do we need to even take this to the next step? And how do we resolve that? And in our case, it was a situation where we literally had to take the company to the brink of saying, look, the company's going to go out of business in 2 weeks. So either we do a deal or we don't. And that's the point when the deal got done, right? So, I mean, that's, but it got done. And it's funny, like I said, it's actually kind of difficult for me to get up here and talk about this a little bit because, it's a process that you celebrate the rewards and you celebrate the successes along the way. And you have to do that. And you have to, when the inverter works, when you get your first data, when you get your first contract signature, I mean, you have to celebrate every one of those things because you have these things in the background that can weigh you down. And for us, the success is we solved it. And that's a pretty big thing for us. Yeah.
How does this process impact your dealings with your customers or prospective customers in terms of any disclosures or
Sure.
obviously VCs? That would be very
He had very little contact directly with most of our customers. There were a few partners pieces in it. So, in very practical terms, it's you have a relationship with your customers, but the customers have a relationship with your company. And we kind of did it on a case-by-case basis, which is, this person is just no longer here. This person is now going to be the new person working with you. And you very much, we didn't put out a press release. That's not, it's not that level. This is just we had a difference in opinion about the value of something, and there was unfortunately a legal framework that dealt with it, and we had to go deal with it. And, that was, and what's interesting is that's now almost 2 years ago in the process, and we're doing great, and the pieces are there. And the customers that we have are still, they're still waiting for their first big box to come in. We've got a few prototypes out running, and we've got data, but we still have Chevron, we still have Cost Plus. We didn't lose much traction in that regard. You lose your traction because I had to spend 5 months of the company run 24 hours a day dealing with a situation that had very little to adding value to the company. And, the amount of customers, the amount of traction, we had a 2.5-year head start on a market, which we now only have a 1.5 year head start, which is a good head start. Happy to have it, but boy, I'd like to have that year back if we could do it over again. So I think there's more of an impact to that as we're watching competitors come out, which is always nice. It's nice to have a little validation that you were in the right space doing the right thing. But you'd like to have that time back because that's where the damage comes in.
So going back to the angels, when you were raising money that way, and you talked about the process once you're in it and the fact that having one angel gives you credibility with the next one. Step back earlier than that, when you were just starting, how did you think about who are we going to approach? How did you first approach them? How much money were you looking for that way? Just that very early stage process of before you actually have the first angel committed.
We had built, a couple different models with an understanding that we felt like we were going to have a prototype. This is assuming that we would be able to find hardware off the shelf and buy it and just put it together and make it run. They would have a prototype roughly by the end of 2009. So we had done some basic math and said, we need probably 9 to 12 months worth of burn. We think it's going to roughly take this number of people, these number of things, and that if we can raise that amount of money, that's what we would do. And that's where the $1.5 million seed cap came on the convertible note, which is it's a fairly that's about the right size for a typical angel round at that point. You were between $1 million and $1.5 million. And within that, you then very quickly and you do this at a bar and a table or over dinner, and you just you sit down and say, well, here's mine and here's yours, and here's who I know and here's who I know, and you go out and very quickly say, where can we get the first levels of commitment before you even step in, and that's very much kind of a question of what you're coming to the table with, of like, I think I can make 15 phone calls, 5 of them are going to get responded, I'm pretty sure we can pull in this amount of money. And interestingly enough, I mean, this was a situation where I could make personal phone calls and pull in a few hundred, and he had lined up, someone outside who came in, who vetted me, and in many ways, is still one of our most active investors. So we each brought a little bit of network in different ways to the table in that regard, and that was before we incorporated. So we kind of knew where our first 250 was going to come from regardless, and at that point, we wanted to get started because we knew, again, that the market was coming. I will say this, I mean, there's different ways of doing this. Would I pick a business next time that earned revenue sooner? Yes. This is, the accidental entrepreneur to some degree. We got into this thinking that this was going to be a software play and we were going to be able to pick up off-the-shelf hardware and make a go at it. It turns out to make the model work, you have to have very specific hardware, which has now turned this for the last couple of years into a hardware development project, which means it's going to be $60 to $80 million with a VC. We're on track, but we're talking about going out and raising an insane amount of money to me this summer. Would we ever meant to do that? When you're out thinking about, I can get 150 here and 100 here. I mean, do you know that's where you're going to? You have no clue. I mean, the goal is make a decision, get going. You'll figure it out along the way. And I'll say this: we had 3 other people in my class who all started their own companies at the same time I did. I was the only one that gave up my day job, and I'm also the only one still doing it. So you'll read about Blakely and Spanx and all these other things. I think it was just unfortunate about how they were working at night and cranking through these things. If you can make money day one, do it. But I'll also tell you right now, if you don't give up your day job and make the commitment, the chances of you making that turn are so less. You really have to make a full-time pressure. So I think we're out of time now to look at it. But
We promised people
happy.
that we'd let you get
Go.
out to day jobs, but thank you very much for coming.
It's a pleasure. I'll be outside if you have any more questions. Appreciate the time.
Thank you, Brian. This was
Thank you.
fascinating. Little gift here from Wharton.
Great. Thank you.